What will you do when your money works for you? Welcome to the Tech Girl Financial Podcast with your hosts, Victor and Kim Gaxiola. From the home office in California, here is Victor and Kim.
Welcome back to the Tech Girl Financial Podcast. Kim, it's been a minute.
It has, but that's because we've been
Busy.
busy, getting new great content to provide for everyone.
Yeah, and the fact that when I say busy, we've just done a full sweep of, reviews and talking to people and catching up. And so we're starting to head into the summer period, and things slow down a little bit in the summer, but that doesn't mean that you stop. So today we have an exciting new podcast. We have a really special guest, someone that we've been working with. It's Cindy McCormick, who's a college advisor. And Kim, you started this process. Tell them a little bit about who she is.
So Cindy McCormick is the owner and chief counselor, I would say, at Cindy McCormick College Advising. And I particularly love how she is working with students and their families to find the right place and the right fit for each student based on their unique personalities and talents.
She's a matchmaker, I think. That's how I like to think about it, from the standpoint that she's been working very closely with our son Noah and our family in not only identifying specifically his skill set and his aptitudes and his interests, but then being able to translate that into identifying what would be a good fit from a college standpoint or university that not only would be a good fit for him to attend, but would actually want him because of his skill set.
Right. And I think the people that are listening to this podcast a lot of times, are the parents of students. And so we have mixed emotions about finding the right college. Mixed emotions because that means they may leave us to fly the coop, and we have to, it usually comes with a big price tag, and there's a lot of anxiety there and a lot of unknowns, a lot of uncertainties. And so I think this is probably one of the biggest investments that we see our clients making for their kids' future. And sometimes it's the biggest investment that the kid has made in their lifetime if the students are paying for that education themselves. And we want to make sure it is an investment, because there are two types of things that we can do. We can spend money on a car, which depreciates, or we can invest money in a house, which typically appreciates. And so when we invest in our children's education, or our children invest in their education, we want to make sure that it's moving up and not just a depreciating asset.
Well put, and especially from a financial advisor, really well put. So here is our interview and conversation with Cindy that took place after a session that I had with her. So a lot of this was fresh, and we were really happy to have her on the show. So without further ado, here's Cindy.
Welcome, Cindy. Why don't you get started by telling us a little bit about your journey to where you are right now?
Thank you, Kim, for that welcome. And I'm delighted to be here with you today. And my background starts back, I can start at UCLA, where I got my degree in sociology, and went right into my master's degree in education and became a teacher. And I loved teaching, and even had some interest in helping students become writers, because I noticed a real gap in quality writing instruction. And in my school district, I became a mentor. I got my certification in writing specialization from UC Santa Barbara. So then when I took a break to have not 1, 2, 3, or 4 kids, but 5,
Wow.
I became really the writing tutor of my town. And that helped me keep my foot in the business, as well as be a mom a lot of the time. And what happened is, as my oldest got to high school age, I started looking for a college advisor for him. And that company I used recognized through our conversations that I had some expertise in writing and went on to hire me as their writing specialist, their essay specialist. And that was a perfect fit and a great entrance back into the career world. And so I was a writing specialist and simultaneously got my college advising certification. And then, as life would have it, that company was purchased, and it was a perfect launch point for me to start my own company, Cindy McCormick College Advising. And I haven't looked back because I found exactly the place where I am happy and where I know I'm doing my best work.
That's so fun to hear. I love hearing how people kind of evolve into the role that they're playing and the background that kind of leads them up to that. First and foremost, I just want to say people are going to think we set this up. So go Bruins. Both Kim and I went to UCLA, so we're kind of stacking the deck here. But as we mentioned in the introduction, you've been working very closely with our son Noah, and he's preparing himself to, take that next step of his educational journey, recognizing that he really does want to get a college degree, but there is so many schools to choose from. And for a lot of people, I think it can be overwhelming in not knowing exactly what next step to take. And so I want to unpack and explore that a little bit about how you help students and families identify the good fits. But the other part, which is really interesting based on your writing, I'd also like to explore how things have really changed when it comes to the application process, where SATs and ACTs and standardized tests were really one of those areas that you can differentiate students. And I see much more emphasis now being placed on the writing, on the essays, and being able to articulate and tell your story, but within a certain number of characters. So those are two areas I'd love to explore. Why don't we first start with how you help families and students identify what would be a good fit for them?
Absolutely. And that's a sweet spot for me because a lot of the college advising process is about getting to know the student, and even more so, coaching and counseling a student to know their own preferences, their selves, their strengths, their interests. So I start off preferably early on, probably around freshman or sophomore year, where I can ask them questions. And I find a lot of students don't always have answers. For example, I have this set of twins I worked with years and years ago. And I remember the mom was sitting in with me, and I was trying to get to the bottom of, who are you? What type of environment, college environment, would be the right fit? So I was saying, do you like to be around a bunch of people and kind of feel like a single person in a crowd? Or do you like a small, intimate setting where you can have deep conversations? And both of these twin boys looked at me and said, I don't know. I said, okay, well, let's talk about what kind of academic environment. What do you see yourself most comfortable doing? More of the math and kind of STEM kind of projects, or are you more into the humanities or writing or deep thinking? And again, they just looked at me blank face. And I said, okay, that's okay. Let's talk about extracurriculars. You get where I'm going. Mm-hmm. Well, by about 5 minutes of that questioning in, I looked at their mother, and she had a tear in her eye, and she was someone I'd known outside of college advising. And I said, oh my goodness, what's wrong? And she looked at me and she said, I feel like as a mother, I dropped the ball. My kids don't know themselves, and I feel so guilty. And I said, oh my goodness, no, that's exactly why I've got this job, because parents do so much parenting. They are also not thinking about interviewing their kids about who they are, what they're interested in, what they want to do. And that's where I come in. And that's what I love, is coaching students to become more introspective and deep thinking and kind of explore their preferences and what they want, so that by the time they apply to college, that list fits them, versus some students who would come to me maybe at the beginning of senior year and say, hey, we need to find a list of colleges and apply. And I'm thinking, we're kind of out of time, because that introspection, it takes time and it takes thought, and a lot of things can't just be felt in the moment.
That is such a great story and very relatable. For a while there, I would manage Noah in the baseball team. And I found that it was very difficult for me to manage him, because where does the line stop between being caring dad, and being the manager of the baseball team. And I found it can be very challenging sometimes to play that role of coach, even for your own kids, because you sit there and you say, I should know them. Who's going to know them better than their own parents? And yet, will they listen to me? Is it mom or dad talking, or is it someone who's an adult who has had some experience? And that's what we have found extremely valuable in working with you, because I think you've been able to ask the right questions to really extract from Noah much more than I think we could have extracted from him. I've had the good fortune of sitting in on these meetings, and I know Kim did the bulk of them. But just those conversations and him opening up to you and sharing, what he's looking for, I'm sitting next to him and I'm like surprised in some cases. I'm like, oh, I didn't know that, going to a coastal school was so important to you, or that you really didn't want to leave the state of California. Things like that have been eye openers. And I think that just means that wherever he ends up, it's very likely to be a great fit, because it's checking all those boxes for him. So I thought it's been a great experience.
Absolutely. And there are so many students and parents who may not realize what a lost opportunity it would be to end up at the wrong college, the wrong fit, because you didn't do that research and that introspection. And then you've got to pivot, transfer, start somewhere else. And then really they're not going to go to college forever. So that could be lost time altogether. So the earlier you can get an idea of what the right fit is, really you're just maximizing your path going forward.
And it's so funny, because I think Noah is probably like many kids, that he has had ingrained in his mind, just focus on the grades. I will leave whatever it is I'm supposed to do and wherever it is I'm supposed to go for later, because right now my job is just to get good grades.
Oh, and there's, that kind of taps into this current landscape we're in, where I do feel students have a lot of pressure on them to not just get good grades, but to maximize extracurriculars and potentially, just do great on those ACT or SAT tests and AP exams, and the list goes on and on. And so it is such a balancing act for a student, for example, like Noah, who's saying, look, I can do one thing. I can work on my grades. The rest of this is going to have to wait. And I have to come in and say, okay, I'm with you. I support students wherever they are. I meet them where they're at. But I want you to be aware that there are going to be a lot of closed doors if we don't balance out the rest of this situation. But the other side of that coin is, for a kid who's trying to do it all and wearing themselves thin or to the point of anxiety, we have to say, no, we're going to put on the brakes, because there are plenty of schools for everyone, even those who are singular minded to just grades, or kids who are managing to do it all. We can open more doors, but is it the right fit if they're so anxious in that process?
And that's one of the things in this whole process that I have found extremely fascinating, because oftentimes I think a lot of students, maybe even parents, put a lot of pressure on their kids to pursue a specific school. In my case, would love for Noah to consider going to UCLA. I mean, I went there. I had a great experience. I would love for him to have the same kind of experience that I did. But that doesn't mean that it's the right fit for him. And so what I've found really interesting is that people can come in and say, I want my kid to go here, 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 list out all these different universities. The kid may actually have a few universities that they want to go to, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be the right fit. So I think what was really interesting in this entire exercise was saying there is likely a school that wants someone like Noah. It's the other way around. It's not where Noah wants to go. It's what school would want and embrace someone like Noah and really help him go to the next level.
Absolutely. I love that. And toward the end of the year, senior year, when my seniors have finished sending off their applications and now they've heard back and now they're weighing their decisions, right? They ideally have gotten quite a few offers and they're weighing them out. And I'm finally seeing their eyes sparkle with, all these schools want me. They want me. And that's what I try to communicate to them at the beginning of that process of applying, they feel so vulnerable and out of control. Like, here, colleges have all the power and I have none. I'm just submitting an application and hoping they'll choose me. And I keep telling them, if we build the right list, we are looking at, you are at a situation where you are the really big deal and they're hoping to get you because you're going to add to their environment. You're going to make their campus better. You are exactly what they need to improve their whole business, because colleges at one level are seriously just a business. So they're shopping. And then when those admissions offers come through, they're going, oh, I get it. I get to pick now. Like, see, you're the commodity here. And think about what you're going to add to this school. So there's a lot of convincing going on when they're nervous, but then at the end, it's fun to watch it play out.
So I love that. It actually gives me chills to a certain extent to hear you say that, because on the flip side, I see my daughter who, it was Berkeley all the way, Berkeley College of Music. And, that to me seemed like it had a name brand attached to it. So I was a little skeptical of whether it was the right school for her or not. And I remember when she got there, I know she felt a little bit of imposter syndrome. Like, I'm a mistake. I just barely got in, and it wasn't, and this is a mistake, for me to even be here. And so it took her a while to get over that. And I know that was a struggle that first semester. Now, since all of that has happened and I see what she's doing there at the school, I don't have the same opinion as for her and her situation. It's perfect. It's not just a name brand school. I think it will help her so much get to where she wants to go. But that doesn't mean it's right for Noah. And they have very similar talents. And so I love that you say what you say about there are schools that want you, and flipping this around instead of who am I worthy for, but I am worthy, and let's get me in the right group of schools that want you.
Absolutely. Yep. And I always say they're going to be lucky to have you. They're going to be lucky. And if they don't see that, it's kind of akin. There's a lot of times I make the comparison or the analogy to dating. And I say, if you wanted to date someone and they didn't want to date you, would you just go out with them anyway when they're not interested? No, you would find someone who's a good fit for you, someone who shares your interests and sees your value. So I always say there's so much they understand with that analogy, because they're in the thick of this high school scenery of dating and they get it. And I go, why are you chasing that person who's not interested? Let's go after the person who fits you. They laugh at your jokes. They want to be with you. And then when you're together, you're a better version of yourself. Kind of the same with colleges.
So what do you do? And that just leads me to this next question. What do you do in a situation where a student is so bent on one school, and it's the top school, or like I say, the name brand school, but that may not be the right thing for them? How do you advise somebody like that?
So actually, that is a lot of there's a lot of consideration going into that, because I do have a handful of students who's, whether it's themselves, some students just bent on what they'll call top 20. And top 20 is so subjective, but there is kind of the US News and World Report rankings, which a lot of people, especially internationally, recognize. So they see that list, and there are students who believe, and families for that matter, who believe, oh, if it's on that list, it must be the best school. And one of my analogies, I start right off the bat with a family, and I say, look, let's say we're going on vacation. And I say to you, okay, pack your best shoes. And the family looks at me like, okay, well, where are we going? And I say, exactly. Because if you're going to the beach, that's a different pair of best shoes than if you're going on a ski trip up to Canada. So best is relative and contextual. And it's the same with colleges. So when I start off, ideally somewhat, like I said, freshman or sophomore year, I'm able to work with students and teach them about fit. But sometimes if I get them in a point in the process where they're really not going to change their minds, I say, you know what, go for it. You can go for that really selective college that maybe in that particular student's case isn't the right fit. And I say, perfect, but let's have a balanced list as well. So you can have that school on your list. I get it. You feel really connected to it. And let's add some more. So we'll have other schools that are a better fit for them in my mind, but I support them because it's kind of like I didn't walk in their shoes their whole life. I don't know all the factors that are contributing to that connection to that school. So I want to support them if they want it. And I just make sure they have other options.
Right. And I think a couple of things that we've been sharing and learning through this entire process is that there's a whole lot of value in wanting to make sure that if you are going to be taking those steps, that you're taking the steps in the right direction, given the good fit. The fact is, and this is something that is not lost on us because we've been working with families from the time that their kids are infants, preparing for college on the financial side and starting college education savings programs that hopefully will build and grow in time for them to be able to cover the cost. So it's never lost on us and it's never lost on our clients that this is an investment. So you want to make sure that you're making a good investment by choosing and going forward with the right fit so that investment does provide that value. But for a lot of kids and maybe those that aren't as prepared from the standpoint that through financial means, perhaps they need to get some aid. They might have to take a student loan. You want to make sure it's a good fit because this might be the very first major purchase or major investment that they make for themselves where they're carrying the burden, which has some long-term implications. So when it comes to working with people, how do you level set, those expectations of the schools that they want to go to with the affordability and more importantly, the employment opportunities that follow after? So if you get someone who's pursuing, let's say, a language degree in some language that doesn't exist anymore or so, is that employable? I'm just kind of curious about how you coach people, especially if they're pursuing things that may be difficult to translate into a real career.
Oh, I mean, you just hit on so many important points in my advising. So number one is financial fit will outweigh all the other factors of fit. And I have to have a real honest conversation with families quite often because we get through, this is the distance from home you're comfortable with, and this is the college environment and spirit and academics, et cetera. And then the schools on the list are maybe not going to fit the budget. So what's the point? So a lot of times parents will say to me, we'll make it work. It's okay, Cindy, we'll make it work because they have raised their child to have all these opportunities and really optimize all the potential that kid may have. And then suddenly they feel like if we can't afford it, we're letting our child down. And so I coach early on about financial fit. And yes, I love that you do what you do. And Victor, you and I had kind of some fun conversation when we met with Noah recently and talked about, oh my goodness, look at these opportunities for merit aid and what other types of aid. And knowing that whole world is so empowering to realize an expensive college isn't always expensive. But in terms of the investment and the return on it, I personally think you have got to be looking past the 4 years. For so many, it's we made it, we crossed the finish line, we ended the marathon, the kids in college, done. And like, wait, it's 4 years, maybe 5. And then you're out earning an income. And like you said, if it's a language degree, really, what kind of income can they expect? And let's say the family did take out some loans. How are they going to repay those loans with a low salary? So the answer to that portion of the question is data. I use data as much as I can in my practice. I'm always looking up. I have specific websites that I use that will tell you the average salary coming from that college per major, per degree. and we'll look it up, and I'll say, look, if your average salary getting out of that school is $35,000 a year, and you took out, let's say, $200,000 in loans, which are going to be accruing interest, is that going to be worth it? So it's very honest and specific and ready to plan reality-based steps once they're out.
Yeah, and for the benefit of our listeners, I'll tell you, I was really blown away and impressed with the process of doing that assessment of Noah, or the assessment, I say Noah because, well, he's the one that we're really, really worried about right now, no. But, and trying to identify what his aptitudes were, his skills and his strengths, where was he strong and where was he needing some help? And then translating that through this data and software to come back with potential career choices. Hey, you could be an architect. You could be this. You could be that. And then exploring even deeper and finding out what is the need? Is it an area of growth? What kind of salary can he expect? And it really starts for him, I think, seeing that this is obviously a journey, but that the decision to go to college and pursuing a specific career actually can translate into a particular job, an industry, a focus, a salary. So you start seeing this more as a process, as a stepping stone, as an opportunity, that going to college is more than checking the box. It is part of that checkboxing that is called life, right? That leads to a career, that leads to a life.
And I think it's funny now hearing that, because I haven't heard all the details about the last conversation, but I remember that first conversation where Noah, it's like, why do you want to go to college? And it's like, because that's the next thing to do, with no real, he is just checking a box at that point in time.
Yes. And that's one thing I think just so surprising to me is the immense variation in the student personas coming in. I can have one student who knows exactly what they do, what they want to do, where they want to go, how they're going to get there. And then I can have a student who really hasn't given it much thought, and yet they're both equally capable. They're both really intelligent. It's just developmental, or maybe it's, I don't know, DNA, but the students who know exactly what they want to do, they think, can sometimes be as much a job to counsel as someone who has no idea, because the student who thinks they know might be closed-minded to other opportunities and exploration. So in both cases, I'm trying to open up their mind to explore, to think, to weigh, to research. And then when they finally come up with that final college list they're going to apply to, they can tell me exactly why and to what major they're applying at each college.
That's so interesting. So I want to go back to your comment about parents saying, we'll make it work, because that just makes me, from my vantage point, I'm like, oh no, you can't just say that. You can't. And I always say a lot of times parents are using hope in how they strategize for college savings. I'm like, don't use hope as your strategy of where your kid is going to go and how much you save for your child's college education. And so, it's funny because in our business, we do a lot of the same thing. It's just a different subject, but we're both planners, right? And so I always tell my clients, tell me everything you want first. Don't hold back. Tell me everything. It's easier for you to tell me everything you want and then me trim it down than for you to tell me just a little bit of what you want to see if that's okay and then ask for more and more and more down the road. It's harder to do it that way. And so from a standpoint of, these kids come to you and I think you want to keep that open mind, because you have no idea what the merit money is. And especially for a first-time child, the oldest, parents really don't have a clue what's going on until they've done it once. And so how do you balance that? Just give me your wish list and then we'll figure out from there. But keep in mind, even if you get into that top school and it doesn't fit the budget, you know, it's a hard one to play with kids.
Oh yeah, because when emotions come into play, logic might leave the scene.
Yes.
Right? So one, I do start my very first meeting out by saying the financial fit can outweigh everything else. And when parents, and so my first question early on, I probably asked this, I know I asked this with you as well, is what is your college budget? And probably 9 times out of 10, the parents will look at each other and say, well, we haven't really discussed that. Maybe not 9 out of 10, but more often than not, we haven't really talked about it. So then I give them homework and I say, okay, you need to discuss what you are willing to pay and what you feasibly can pay. And sometimes they'll come back with an actual number, and sometimes they'll say, well, we don't know. It could depend on the market because it's investment money. And so I understand that. But then when we start getting closer and I see maybe some colleges on the list that they wanted that I know didn't fit that original budget, the way I handle that is I say, look, I get it. I've been there, right? Dreaming one of my own sons could go to, let's say, an Ivy League school, which they're not going to give a dime of merit money. They only give need-based money. So if you're in that middle class where you don't really qualify for need-based aid, and some colleges would give you money for your high grades or test scores, but not the Ivies. So you're dreaming of it. And you do start telling yourself, well, we have a retirement fund we could dip into, or we could take another loan out on the house. You start thinking that not very logical thinking because you're hopeful. So I say to parents, I want you to envision this moment. Your student's in, they're about to start, and you get a bill. And I mean an email in your inbox that has an amount. And that amount for an Ivy is going to be probably around $40,000 for one semester. Now it's a bill. And that bill doesn't say, oh, we've got a layaway plan. It's nothing like that. It is due in, let's say, 2-3 weeks. And if you want to put it on a credit card, you're going to be accruing interest on that. So is that cash sitting in your bank account? That's when it gets real. So I walk them through a very physical, reality-based path to say, wow, if that bill comes in, let's say, August, and then again in January, how are you going to pay it? Because it's going to be due, and your student can't be in that college if you can't pay it. And that tends to work.
Yeah, that does work. And I know I see my bill.
That would work for me. That would definitely work for me. Well, but part of this exercise, though, I will say, yes, there are a number of when I started, I said that there was, in trying to find the right fit, I had no idea just how many universities, colleges, vocational schools, and opportunities there are where they're at every level, whether it's a community college, something down the middle at a state, and then, maybe in California, like the UC system. One thing that I really liked about this exercise, and I think this was the data that you were sharing with us that was kind of an eye-opener, was that whether it's private or public, that because of people's evaluation through FAFSA as to what they can afford, and then with the needs gap that could exist that the school would be willing to pony up, and then other merit-based and such, that it almost levels the playing field a little bit. Like, I always thought that private school for a lot of it was kind of out there and unavailable. And yet, if with the right fit, with the right school and the right grades and such, there's a way to kind of move the levers in such a way that you could say, hey, this school, which is private, is about as much, if not a little bit more, than this other school that's public. So whereas I would have discounted and said, there's no way we can go to a private school or have 2 kids in private school. Now I'm thinking, well, let's not close that door, especially if it's a good fit and if it's something that really wants someone like Noah. It goes back to the original question that we were saying is, how do you help people find that right fit? And you said it starts with the financials, but that was the thing that was a little bit of an eye-opener, that sometimes some of these schools that I thought were completely unreachable may not be.
Oh, absolutely. And sometimes I find it like I have to repeat that over and over to families who are so entrenched in that belief that if it's private, it's more, if it's public, it's less, period, end of story. What doesn't help is if you Google a college and put price up, what'll come up a lot of times is just that sticker price, I call it, the cost of attendance. But that sticker price is almost never accurate. It is going to be a changing number depending on that institution, because there's a competitive market with what pricing a college puts out. And there's some great authors out there who write about this in such better detail than I'm going to give it right now. But bottom line is, if you want to look competitive with other schools, you have to up your price, because people believe, oh, if it's higher price, it might be more quality. There's that mindset. So some colleges up their price to look competitive with other schools, but they may have the endowment or the money behind them to not have to charge that. So the minute students get in, they get slapped with a scholarship of, it could be over $20,000. So even though that sticker price looks unattainable, the reality is it's much less. So then you know that going in, and then you say, oh, and they give more money if the student has high grades or if the student has high test scores, and then so on and so forth. You really can lower a price for both some public schools and a lot of private schools. But again, like you said, it's all about fit.
Well, one thing that I was very curious about is, how do you, Cindy, what is your measure of success? Like, how do you evaluate, how well you're doing?
Oh, that's a great question. I want to say at the end of the day, my students just getting in, the most obvious answer, right? Getting into the colleges on their list. Sometimes a school that we thought might be out of reach, they have these really high acceptance rate or GPAs and low acceptance rates. And one of my students gets in where I knew that would be the right fit, but we just didn't know if maybe the essays were going to be that little je ne sais quoi that pushes them over, and then they get in. So that's a measure of success. But I think ultimately it's the feedback from the parents. It's when a sibling comes to me, then I know I've done my job right. I think ultimately when I like go to tour colleges, sometimes I'll have a student already there and I'll text them and say, I'm here, can you meet me? And they absolutely drop everything to find me on campus and have lunch with me. I know that sounds more like the teacher in me, but I love that because I've formed a relationship with them where they're successful, they're leading their lives and going onward, but they did realize I played a part in the process, and now we have a connection that's going to last forever. So that's a little bit my measure of success as well.
That's excellent. I love hearing that. And, we all like to see our people be successful, right? We live vicariously sometimes through them and what they're doing.
I have one little story. I was recently touring, or I went to Australia, New Zealand to see my son who's doing a semester abroad in Australia. And then we went over to New Zealand because we were down there. And right as my plane is landing from Australia to New Zealand, my phone, when you take it off the airplane mode, my phone is blowing up with phone calls and messages. And I'm like, what is going on? Who's calling me over here in New Zealand? Well, what had happened is the results had just come out. Ironically, here we were talking about UCLA. And I had 3 different kids calling me relentlessly, needing me to pick up so they could tell me they got in. And that was such a happy moment. Here I am in a plane in the middle of another country, and my kids are saying, I got in. It was a good feeling.
Oh, I bet. So you must also enjoy that day. What is it? The senior day when everybody shows what school they chose.
Yeah, the SIR, Statement of Intent to Register.
Yeah. And you see them on social media, everybody with their sweatshirts on or what.
Yep, I love it.
That is a great story. Well, anything else? Is there anything that you would like us to hear? I know you talk a lot about your philosophy, and I just definitely want to get that across to everybody. So can you tell us a little bit about how you go about doing what you do and what your philosophy is for kids and their families and finding the right place?
So my philosophy is finding a path to the perfect fit. And that means I work really hard to help students be self-aware and self-actualizing, because at the end of the day, I want them to know more about their strengths, how they are unique, how they stand apart, and what that might look like in a college plan and path. And so if I can really get through to a student and a family to be honest with themselves, and in a lot of cases with students, that honesty means being willing to explore who they are. And it's so fun when they're looking at me and I'm saying, look at this assessment we did. You are a creative brainstormer and you didn't realize how unique you are in that, let's say, example category. You're so creative. You need to be in an environment where you're talking and you're contributing ideas, and you're really not going to be happy sitting behind a desk without a collaborative group. It's that type of awareness that just lights a kid's face up. Like, really, me? I'm different? Yes, you are. That is a unique strength of yours. Now let's pivot and figure out what kind of environment, not just in college, but in a career, will really build you up and help you feel like you've made it, you are fulfilled. So that's more of my philosophy, is finding that spark, that twinkle in their eye when we know we're onto something, to help them become an adult who feels like, yeah, I'm living my best life.
And I think that that's exactly what the admissions officers are also looking for. And so that coaching and being able to articulate and express that goes back to what I said earlier, which was this whole idea of the writing piece. The essays has become so much more important in the application process, I think, because as you no longer look at, let's say, ACTs or SATs, or the standardized tests are not carrying the kind of weight they did when I applied to college. I think that the coaching and the ability for you to help the students be able to tell the story, tell them what makes them different, what is unique and special about them, is what you want to jump off the page or off the application through the essay questions, so that an admissions officer, in evaluating a stack of applications, what is going to stand out. And the reason why I share that is because when Mika went through the application process with Berkeley, there's an audition, as you know, for it. And we thought through, what song is she going to perform? How is she going to stand out? What is something that she can bring to the table that is different than what would have been expected? And so we thought through, and to her credit, she said, I really want to sing a mariachi song. It's a song she heard since she was a little girl, because I would play it endlessly. She always loved it. She had the vocal range for it. So she practiced and practiced and practiced to sing this song in Spanish, which is not her first language, and it's something she grew up listening to at home. My parents speak Spanish. Kim's dad is from Mexico. And so it was something that she felt a connection to. And she said, I'm going to sing this song. And I remember her practicing. So unfortunately, the time she did the audition was during the pandemic. So she did it through Zoom. And I have to imagine that the audio quality of Zoom was not what it would have been to have been in the same room with her. But she took a leap. She said, this is going to jump off the page. This is something someone's going to remember, because if you are to look at her, and if you go to our website, she's on our website, light eyes, light hair, not what you'd expect from a mariachi singer. She goes on this audition. She sings this song. She nails it. At the end, she said that the evaluator who was watching it, he only had one word. He said, fun. And then months later, she got in. And I think that was a big part of it, was that she stood out. And so, I want to go back to how you help people with those essay questions, because sometimes they only give you a character limitation. You can't ramble on. You have to be concise. So I'm sure that your writing experience and, your background in that really helps people out.
I absolutely hope so. And exactly what you just said, a student has tapped into what makes them light up, their own version of their special place. The essay words pop off the page. Sometimes I'll be maybe 4 essays in with a student, and then we get to that 4th one and I go, what? where'd this content come from? This is amazing. It's just, it grabs you. The words grab you. You can tell when they found their sweet spot. And then it's just so much fun to have a student write from the heart. And that is part of my job, is getting to know them to a point where I can ask the right questions and suddenly see it come through. And then we know it's like a unanimous, oh, okay, we found it. Now they're like the mariachi song. You know when you hit it.
Yes, lightning strikes. And that is the sweet spot, I think, is when the student opens up and shares so much with you. I think you know that is where the magic will happen.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, this has all been such a great conversation, and we really appreciate all your insights. And obviously, thank you so much for helping Noah narrow his focus. And really, he's a 16-year-old boy. I mean,
17.
Wait.
Hey, remember those 5 kids I said I had? They're all boys, so I get boys. And then good thing I'm a girl, so I get them too.
Yes, that was a plus, your 5 boys.
So I'm sure people are very interested in learning more, and we will include a lot of the notes on our show notes for our podcast. But if someone wanted to learn more, Cindy, and get a hold of you and maybe pursue this for their own families, and as you said earlier, you start working with people when they're like freshmen in high school and sophomores. So this is a process. If they're coming to you as seniors, they've lost a lot of time. So what would be the best way for them to get a hold of you and to get started?
So the best way to get a hold of me is probably going to my website, which is cindymccormickcollegeadvising.com. And anyone can read about our philosophy, our services, our timeline for curriculum, and all of our offerings. Even for someone who wanted to just know about what kind of summer programs are out there for students on that extracurricular note, I even have a resources page where for free, anyone could come in, and there are over 700 different links to summer programs. So I like to be a resource, if not a place people can come and purchase a package or just an independent session. I have it all on my website.
Well, great. I think that covers everything. I don't know how we could end any differently than bringing out the magic in students through their writing.
Mm-hmm.
I do love that. That's where I got my start. It's kind of a full circle moment.
Well, we want to thank you for being part of the podcast today and sharing your insights. I mean, this is awesome. I hope people will I'm sure they'll get a whole lot out of this. So again, if you're interested in learning more, check out Cindy's website. We will include a link to it from our show notes, as well as the blog post that accompanies all our podcasts. And Cindy, again, thank you for joining us, and thank you for helping Noah. Thank you for helping all these students find the right fit.
Yes, thank you so much. It definitely shows that you care about what you do.
Oh, well, thank you, Victor and Kim. It was such a pleasure being here.
Well, that was a great conversation, but not surprising. I mean, given all the experience that we've had, both of us working, I'm glad you brought me into the process, and then I got to have a great conversation with Noah to experience that whole review of the colleges that he could apply to, the ones that would want him, and the probability that he would actually get in given his current grades.
I know it sounds like I missed a good one this past weekend, but I'm glad that you were in on the process too.
Well, and I think what really came out of the podcast, or hopefully out of it, was the value and the importance of having a coach. I mean, people will spend a whole lot of money if their kid plays baseball to get them in a travel team with the right coaches, right? Or the same thing if they're doing a more academic, that you want to get them with the right tutors. Well, here's a huge expense, which is going to 4 or 5 years school, at least initially. If they go to secondary or they continue to get a master's or even further, it's going to cost a lot more. So huge investment. So you want to make sure you take the step you take the right step in the right direction. I think that that's something that Cindy helps people out with, is to find that right first step.
I agree. This is such a big investment that it just seems right to do the due diligence and make sure you're spending it in the right place.
So again, we'll include, a link to her website on our show notes. If you have questions, you can reach out to her. But this is exactly why we created this podcast, I think, is to bring people like her in an area that still touches with finances, but important to ensure that you're getting all the right information and data and that you're working with people who are deep in that space to help you make better financial decisions. Yeah. So before we end the podcast today, I wanted to share a very special announcement on a project that Kim and I have been working on for quite some time. And it's something that our clients have been asking for and we've been talking about. And that is, we are developing a 3-session course on financial literacy for families. We're calling it Adulting 101. And it's going to cover the gamut of establishing a financial literacy program that includes savings and investments. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about investing. Let's talk about lending and budgeting and financial planning. So it's something that should provide the basic building blocks for young adults and teenagers to get a better understanding about how to prepare for being investors and workers in the real world.
Yes, this is the financial foundation that you want your high school child to have, your college graduate to have, and even the young adults that are just starting in the workforce. It's still not too late to learn this information and get started on the right foundation.
Yeah. So we're just developing the content now, but those are some of the areas that we look to explore. We're probably going to offer this in August. It'll be available for an in-person sessions for those that are living in and around the Morgan Hill area here in California, but we're also going to make the exact same content available online via Zoom. So stay tuned. I highly encourage you to connect with us on our social platforms, whether that's on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, or Instagram, just for more information, as we'll be promoting it once we establish the specific dates and ways that you can register to be part of our Adulting 101 financial literacy courses. So we're really excited about it.
And aunts and uncles, if you're looking for a good graduation gift for even a niece or a nephew, this would be one that gives dividends over time.
Yes, give the gift of knowledge, and we're here to provide it. So as you can tell, we're very excited about this, and we look forward to sharing more information in future podcasts as well as through our social networks.
So stay tuned.
Yep. Thank you so much for listening, and we look forward to bringing you more content.
Yes, see you next time.
If you have questions, comments, or suggestions for future shows, please send an email to victor@techgirlfinancial.com or join the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag AskTGF. We also encourage you to follow us on the Tech Girl Financial page on Facebook and connect with us on LinkedIn.
Securities offered through registered representatives of Cambridge Investment Research, Inc., a broker-dealer member FINRA, SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, a registered investment advisor. Tech Girl Financial and Cambridge Investment Research, Inc. are not affiliated companies. Discussions in this show should not be construed as specific recommendations or investment advice. Always consult with your investment professional before making important investment decisions.